able to be here tonight. He is on a bus tour, a senior citizens bus tour. And for some reason he had great difficulty getting that word senior citizen out of his mouth. I don't know. But I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and welcome anybody, any first-time visitors, any guests, welcome. And also, as usual, we want to thank the City of Wilder for allowing us to use the facility tonight. We have a number of things on our business meeting agenda, so we're going to have our speaker first to give us a talk on flying aces of World War I. Our speaker, some of you may remember, Marty, you were here in 2008. Marty Schadler is on the board of the Aviation Museum of Kentucky, based in Lexington, but he's a local guy. He lives here locally. And so with that, Marty, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And it's certainly a pleasure to be here tonight. It was by happenstance. I was getting some copies done at Staples on these kinds of topics. And Steve and I had a little conversation, and from that, it came about that I have the pleasure of speaking to you tonight. If you do remember me, when I was here in 2008, we were talking about the centennial of the first powered flight by an aircraft made in Kentucky. And for a refresher, the gentleman was Matthew Sellers. He did it over in Carter County, over by Grayson and Carter Caves, and it was rather momentous. That was 100 years in 2008. The sad part of that story, he was 5 years after the Wright brothers. Since then, we've had some really good news to come from the museum. In 2011, at the Lexington Airport, where we're located, the airport board gave us a vacant hangar that tripled our display space. So now our planes aren't on top of each other, and we're able to do some things, and we've been able to have events and things that were rather restrictive in the old space. Now you may wonder why is a kid from Campbell County so involved with this. Some years back, in an effort to make the museum a bit more of a statewide endeavor, they started recruiting. I was dumb enough to say yes. So I'm one of the Northern Kentucky board members. Another fellow, Mr. Rocky Fazzolaro, who is a retired Delta station chief, worked here at Cincinnati when Delta was quite large. He's in Union. Rocky and I are the two Northern board members. So we go out and do a little evangelization like tonight. And my goal tonight is to tell you a little bit about what was going on with some very capable pilots who happen to be from Kentucky and earned a status called ace during World War I. Well, you know, I'm talking about flying, and sometimes I realize when I do this, people don't really understand what makes an airplane fly. And it's been known for a long time, and I just want to give you a demonstration. It goes back to 1600s, and a scientist called Bernoulli. And a plane flies because of something called the Bernoulli effect. If you remember from maybe middle school or elementary school science, we've got the natural states of matter, solids, liquids, and gases. And if you heat them up, or cool them down, or move them around, you can make some things happen. That's what Bernoulli found out about the molecules of gases in the air. And if you can imagine this piece of paper, just from a notebook, as a surface that has a top and a bottom, Bernoulli observed something if we change how those molecules move regarding the surfaces. I'm going to see if I can demonstrate this. Okay, so you saw the paper rise. And all I basically did was thin out those molecules of the gases on top of this surface. Now in this case, the source of the motion was my blowing air out of my mouth. But let's imagine that we take a surface and we give it a shape. The round across the top, that's called a camber, flat across the bottom, and let's pull it through the space to make the air go around it. Well, the same thing will happen. The molecules move differently on the top of that wing surface compared to the bottom, generate something called aerodynamic lift. So create a wing, find a source of propulsion, add some controls to it, pretty soon you got an airplane. So it's the Bernoulli effect that makes planes fly, and all we're really doing is moving those air molecules and the gases in the air quicker over the top of that wing that produces aerodynamic lift. Well, let's start with what it would be like to fly in World War I. I bet all of us have been on an amusement park ride, maybe a roller coaster. And we got thrown to the left and the right. And maybe if we've ridden one recently, we got inverted. We went upside down. But we were strapped in, we were in a metal structure, and it was safe. Back in World War I, those same physical events were happening, but you were in a contraption made out of wood and fabric with an unreliable power source. You probably weren't strapped in, and someone probably was going to come along and shoot at you. So the difference of what we may experience today and what was going on back in World War I is dramatic. It was truly a challenge to be a pilot back then, recognizing the very early state of the art of aerodynamics in aerospace and building airplanes, and just how much training and how reliable those aircraft were. So there's step one, a really dangerous time to fly in some really dangerous aircraft. The pilots are involved in something called World War I, and if you're a regular reader, you know, we really haven't resolved what made that happen. I usually like to talk about World War I as a 20th century catastrophe that got caught up in 18th and 19th century political inertia. And by that I mean we had kings and monarchs and royalties and certain alliances and certain rivalries, and this prince or this king may have been a cousin to a prince and a king over there, and they all didn't get along, and just one assassin's bullet set that whole thing off. Well, there we have World War I beginning, and it's a European affair at first, obviously. It starts in August of 1914, but by April of 1917, the United States declares war, and we get involved, and that's when we'll find out that our aces from Kentucky have their great success after the declaration of war. I mentioned that the war started in 1914. We put that in the context of aviation history. The Wright brothers had just flown in 1903. Not too long. I mentioned that Sellers had just flown in Kentucky in 1908. And in that period, we have a lot of the very first aircraft flights by inventors in Europe. The really big difference is that Europe took to flying, and the technology and the interest among the general public and among the governments was very much exceeding what we had here in the United States. The Wright brothers were very picky about anyone getting their technology. They had lawsuit after lawsuit with other manufacturers and other inventors, and it basically choked off aircraft development in the United States. But when the Wright brothers took their planes to Europe, they would have huge crowds, and they were received by the royalty, and the idea of flying and maybe using it for other purposes was very much an active notion over there in Europe compared here in the United States. So as we begin World War I, most of the European powers had some form of an aircraft or aviation service. Certainly it was primitive. Remember, the Wright brothers had just flown in 1903. We didn't have much technology yet. But what the Europeans could do with airplanes and their ability to design better and better airplanes as the war went along certainly exceeded the United States. We really didn't have any U.S.-built aircraft flying over there until late in the war, and it was a derivative design from a company called de Havilland, and it was a plane called a Jenny. Maybe some of you have heard of that. Only about 400 Jennies ended up in the war, way at the end of the war, flown by Americans. So it was a European event, and it would have stayed a European event probably if the Lusitania hadn't been sunk, and our neutrality was violated, and America joins the war. Let's get back to those pilots for a moment. Especially in Europe, if you decided to become a pilot, you had a lot of status. And so much almost romantically charged with the culture over there and the notion that you were a knight of the air. Just as a knight may have ridden his charger and jousted and was well regarded in that time of society, you were a knight of the air if you were flying a fighter plane or any kind of early aircraft for one of the European powers. An interesting thing is that they didn't expect to fight with them originally. The big benefit that most of the European powers saw when World War I got started was to go up and be able to observe what was going on in the trenches. And to say, oh, we can see that this big unit is moving, we're going to have to move some forces up, or we may see that this unit is moving back. It was going to be more of an intelligence and observation job for the aircraft. Didn't last too long. As the pilots and observers went up, somebody starts carrying a pistol. And if the enemy comes by, take a few shots at him. Then somebody's up there with a rifle. Then someone realizes, hey, if we get close enough, we can drop some hand bombs. Maybe we can give their ground units a fit. And then it escalates up to machine guns and larger aircraft. So we see what I think was a very beneficial technology adapted very quickly for warfare. And maybe that's human nature. We always find good things and find a way to be destructive with them. That's what happened with aircraft. We shouldn't overlook how primitive things were at that time as well. The number of fellows who died in training was very high. And depending on the unit and the country, some statistics say more people died in training than in actual combat. It was just a nasty business. There was really no formal way to train people. So maybe you had the plane described to you, maybe you were running around on the ground a little bit, and then you were thrown in a cockpit and say, you're on, buddy, let's see if you can fly this thing. Extremely risky experience, and like I said, a high number of people would have died just in training. It's a very male-oriented opportunity as well for the pilots. We have white males, young guys, adrenaline junkies, we probably call them these days. Some of them could be called prissy. There's a book called The Canvas Falcons, and I have a list over there, some additional reading. And the author there took a look at some of these, especially the British and the French pilots of World War I, to the point where you might question their mental stability. They were in some ways out in their own dreamland, but something about when they sat down in that cockpit, they became trained killers. And some of them had very successful careers as pilots. Most of them died before the war was over as well, though, either by the enemy or by their aircraft failing. And I should mention, we didn't have any 5-point harnesses, no seat belts, and no parachutes. So, yes, you had to love the risk, and you had to be a little crazy, but a lot of the pilots said, this is so much better than wallowing down in that mud in the trench and the filth that so many of the doughboys, the ground soldiers, had to do. One thing that happens during World War I, especially with the aircraft that are being used, is how quickly they're developed and how quickly they became obsolete. Again, in the Canvas Falcons, the author points out how almost by month, some of the enemy would have an advantage over other enemies because they had a new plane that could go faster or could dive better or maybe had a bigger machine gun on it. And so it was rather dicey that if you got into one of the services and had an obsolete aircraft, you may have been an excellent pilot, but just by your enemy's ability to build a better, faster, more capable aircraft, you were going to be a victim of your enemy's ability to build that and have a pilot to fly it. You know, we're looking at something that's over 100 years ago, and a lot of the technologies we take for granted are just something that have been automated or we're used to. I think of one in particular. It's kind of boring. Welding. Welding has been around for a long time, but one of the developments that came out of World War I was a fully welded aircraft frame. Prior to that, they were using spruce and very durable lumber and finding ways to bolt them together and having some kind of fasteners that wouldn't come apart. But the Germans, credit to them, developed the technology of welding that had been around a long time, but were able to build some full steel tubing welded aircraft frames. Very durable, and one of those developments that could change how the war was going month by month. But I want to share with you just what it was like to get one of these planes going. Time Life did a series called, it's called really The Epic of Flight, and this was one of their called Knights of the Air, all about World War I. And this is a routine to get one of these airplanes started. The pilot first would hand pump air pressure into the gas tank with the ignition switch off and both his air and gas intake valves open. Then, as the mechanic cranked the propeller by hand, the pilot slowly shut down his air valve. When the mechanic, standing next to the engine, had determined that the pistons had sucked in enough gas, he shouted, "Marvin, contact!" And the pilot turned on the ignition. The mechanic gave the propeller a final heave and jumped back for his life. Assuming all was well, the engine coughed, sputtered, and started. Taking off, the pilot was on his own, and for a Green Pilot 1915 plane, the experience could be harrowing. The American volunteer Victor Chapman, who was transferred out of the Foreign Legion and into the French Air Service, described one of his early takeoffs in a stiff breeze. The machine left the ground almost immediately, and I had to hold it down to keep headway. Then it began to buck, squirm, and wriggle. It slid off to the right, to the left, took a short plunge downward, and then attempted to rear. The earth, a scrawny tree or two, looked near and menacing. Needless to say, Chapman made it into the air. Tree or no, a pilot had to remember not to turn too soon after takeoff, lest the plane lose airspeed, stall, and crash. Because of gyroscopic force, a plane with a rotary engine, that was the technology back then, a plane with rotary engine tended to nose down on a right-hand turn and nose up on a left-hand turn, which made right turns close to the ground especially dangerous. Unless the pilot applied a large degree of opposite rudder, the plane might crash. So you just had to have nerve, or you had to be crazy to be flying back then. Now, I do want to concentrate on the 4 aces that came from Kentucky, but we have to give a little credit, and maybe a lot of credit, to the American pilots who got involved on our side, so to speak, by flying with the Royal Flying Corps, the British, that got organized in 1912. And then a number of them ended up flying for France in something called the Lafayette Escadrille. It was a little touchy because we were supposed to be neutral at that time as a country, and the Lafayette Escadrille was a kind of a little charade, I guess you might call it, to hide the fact that we had American pilots who wanted to get into the war and were flying for France. We had some pilots who went through Canada, and Canada being part of the United Kingdom, those guys ended up flying for the Royal Flying Service. And the Lafayette Escadrille very often is associated with World War I, but it's only about 38 American pilots from its formation in April 6, 1916 until the end of the war that were involved with Lafayette Escadrille. One other thing that goes along with those guys volunteering, a lot of them came from moneyed families. They hadn't settled down yet. They were looking for adventure. So we have a lot of people who have like Harvard degrees, well-educated, recognized through kind of high class back in the New England area and that part of our country at that time. But then we have someone like Eddie Rickenbacker, who's probably a name you recognize. He is our top ace for America. He shot down 26 enemy planes. Eddie grew up on the streets of Columbus, Ohio. His father dies very young, and it's a rough and tumble life. He's trying to support his mom and his siblings, and it's just a tough kind of touch and go for Eddie until he gets into the military, and maybe his true talents came out as a pilot. Okay, let's get to these guys I want to talk about from Kentucky. The 4 aces that I'm talking about are up here on this panel. I'm going to describe them individually, but that word ace goes all the way back to 1915 and a paper in France. And at that time, the author of a column compared someone who flew that well as an ace in the deck. And I don't have a whole context of the article, but the idea of being the ace in the deck that helps you win the card game, that kind of pilot got recognized. And it got settled down to 5 victories. If you shot 5 of the enemy down, you would be called an ace. It began with World War I, certainly continued through World War II, into Korea, into Vietnam, where there were very few. But the idea of being an ace is quite an achievement. You're a survivor, you're a capable pilot, which also says how good Eddie Rickenbacker was. He shot down 26 and he lived to talk about it. All right. Well, the first ace from Kentucky I want to talk about, his name is Lawrence Callahan. And Mr. Callahan was born in 1894 in Louisville, and he joined the U.S. Army Air Service after he graduated from Cornell. So he's about 24 years old when he gets into the military. He's one of those educated types who's looking for adventure. Now, because he joined early, he ends up training with the Royal Flying Corps. So he gets some British experience, and he's actually a combat pilot with the Royal Air Corps, flying in Europe, and earns 3 victories while he's doing that, flying a British airplane. It gets into April of 17, the United States declares war, and he moves over to the United States Army Air Service. He's in a different plane. He's flying in something called the 148th Squadron, and he shoots 2 more planes down to get his total of 5. I always find this interesting. We declared war on April 17. A lot of fellows stepped forward, volunteered, got through their training, and the war ends in November 11th, 1918. So many of these aces had to be up against either very inferior pilots or they were very quick learners, because most of them got their 5 victories, some of them had 6 or 7, in a very short time. For Callahan, he shot down all 5 of his enemy planes from June to October of 1918. So he's flying against probably some inferior pilots, but he's out there doing it, and that's quite an achievement in such a short time. Most of our aces from Kentucky did receive other awards. Callahan received something called the Distinguished Flying Cross, and he got that for the combat he did in shooting down his last plane, and this is always interesting, October 28, 1918. That's just days before the November 11th armistice. Well, Callahan serves in World War I, he musters out. Later he comes back and he serves during World War II in something called the 12th Air Force, one of the air forces that was created to serve in the global war, World War II. And he lived until 1977 and the age of 83. So Callahan's picture is up here. There's our first ace. Now our next ace is really a different economic situation. His name is Jesse Creech. He's from Harlan County. If you know anything about the 120 counties of Kentucky, Harlan County is way down in the east in coal country. And Jesse was no fool. He got out of coal country. He was in Washington, D.C. when he joined up with the U.S. Army Air Service. And he ends up in the 148th Squadron with Callahan. Wasn't able to find out if those guys flew together, but Creech is flying a plane that you probably recognize if you read a Peanuts comic strip, and the Sopwith Camel that Snoopy the dog has his imaginary combat with. Anyway, Creech flies the Sopwith Camel. There's a plane that was identified as killing more people in training than people who died flying it in combat. And again, it's just these little things. As I understand, the Sopwith Camel, its landing gear was very narrow. And that's tricky to land a plane with any crosswinds or anything if you have narrow landing gear. They need to be spread out a little bit more underneath the wings. So flying the Sopwith Camel, very capable combat plane if you could master it, but a lot of people didn't. So the record goes it probably killed more people in training than combat. Well, let's get back to Jesse Creech. He ends up with 7 victories, and he does this from August through October of 1918, very quickly. And he gets some awards as well. The Distinguished Flying Cross for 3 missions, and the Distinguished Service Cross, and these are all for gallantry in battle. And you have to read the citations to see some of the things that these gentlemen did to get a recognition for gallantry. But basically they went up there and probably outflew their compatriots who were up there with them. Creech stays in the public eye a little bit. Once he leaves the military, he became a member of the Kentucky House of Representatives from the Lexington area. He continues to fly. He's very active in something called the Lexington Aero Club. And he serves on something called the Kentucky Aeronautics Commission, which probably got rolled into our transportation cabinet of Kentucky today. Kind of a sad story. He was in the insurance business in Lexington. That seemed to be going well, but in 1948 he passes away. He's only 48 years old. So Creech, capable pilot, kept his interest in flying up after the military. Jesse Creech is in the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame. That's something that's at the museum, and we had him honored by induction into the Hall of Fame in 2006. So we have Callahan, we have Creech, and now we have a gentleman by the name of Frank Hayes. Frank Hayes was born around the same time, 1896. He is in Chicago when he decides to join in August of 1917, just a few months after we declared war. And he ends up in something called the 13th Aero Squadron of the United States Army Air Service. He has 6 victories, so he's one beyond what you need to do to get an ace. But he shoots them down between September 13th and November 4, 1918. You can almost count the weeks. So he's quite active and quite successful. He flew a plane that was built in France, and I have some information over on the table. And I'm going to leave that with Steve. I know you didn't have a chance to look at that. And maybe after the business meeting you may want to look at those things, but he flew a plane called the SPAD-13. SPAD, S-P-A-D, is an abbreviation for a French company that built aircraft. And there was the SPAD-7 and the SPAD-13, they were fighter planes. A little bit tough to fly, but a good pilot could really be successful with them. Frank Hayes was one of those who ended up shooting down 6 enemy planes in a French-built aircraft. You might remember I mentioned earlier, we really didn't have any American aircraft flying over there. We were flying British aircraft and French aircraft, and that was dramatically changed by the time we got to World War II, because the technology that grew in the United States in aerodynamics and in aircraft really superseded what was going on in the rest of the world after World War I, to the point that if we look at World War II, so many of our allies, our friends, flew American aircraft because they were the best out there, and we had the capacity to build them, so many of them as well. Well, let's get back to Frank Hayes. He's another guy who gets an honor. He receives the Distinguished Service Cross. He's on a mission where his gun's jammed, and he fakes it as though he's still attacking. And through his own ability, and I don't know what his ability was, maybe it just meant whacking the guns, he clears the machine guns after faking combat, swirling around in a dogfight and chasing enemy planes, and clears his guns and is able to shoot down 2 more aircraft after his guns start working, and chases the enemy away from his commander and gets the Distinguished Service Cross for that. Hayes stays in the U.S. Army Air Service until 1919. He's the one who lives the longest. He got to be 92 years old when he passed away in 1988. He was living out in California. The next case I find rather interesting because he is one who decides to make a career of the military, and some of the things he did after the war, to me, were just as dangerous and as exhilarating as what he was doing during World War I. This gentleman's name is Victor Strom. And Victor was born in Nashville in 1895, but as a child moves with his family to Bowling Green, where his dad is a professor at Western Kentucky University. And he graduates from WKU in 1915, so he's a college graduate. But by 1917, he's in the Army Air Service, and he trains not too far from here. His training took place where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is today. What's different about Strom is that he wasn't in a fighter plane. He was given a job of flying an observation aircraft. And the observation aircraft were told to fly over battlefields and maybe take pictures or maybe record at particular coordinates what you're observing, things like that. They did have some weapons to be defensive, but they were also very easy targets. The enemy didn't want that vital information getting back to the ground troops and the ground commanders. So the observation aircraft, they were very often targets, preferred targets by the enemy. And it was not uncommon for the observation aircraft to go up in a squadron with other combat aircraft, basically trying to guard them and look out for them so that vital information could be gathered by the observation aircraft. Observation aircraft, like I said, some had very primitive photography. Usually they had a pilot and an observer to make those notations. Well, Strom gets into the heat of things very often. With his defensive weapons, he does end up shooting 5 planes down. And he receives some recognition. On one mission, he got the Silver Star. It was a photographic mission, and this is one of these low and slow obligations if you think of photography and photographic technology at that time. He's basically pounced on by a number of German aircraft, stays on course, lives to talk about it, and gets the Silver Star, very high award for doing that, just basically by having the nerves to hang in there and do that. Strom stays in the military, as I mentioned, and during the 1930s, he moves on to be basically the chief test pilot of the Air Service of the United States of America. And I told you how dicey it was to fly these rickety, not very well proven, not very well developed aircraft of World War I. Certainly we're making improvements right after the war, but the planes are moving much quicker. Propulsion systems have improved. The engines and their propellers. And the whole science of that has made these aircraft be much quicker. Certainly there's structural developments, there's aerodynamic developments on wings, shapes and sizes and so on. But to be a test pilot during the 1930s was really probably a high risk and maybe low reward type of job. Victor Strom did that. And he stays in during the 30s as a test pilot. When World War II comes around, he's a deputy commander of something called the 9th Air Force. And there's a Kentucky connection there. The 9th Air Force was originally organized at Bowman Field in Louisville, the General Aviation Airport in Lexington, in Louisville. So there's a Kentucky connection with the 12th Air Force. Strom ends up being the deputy commander, and the 12th Air Force is over in Europe and gets involved with the operations in Sicily and Italy. They're involved with D-Day. They were in the southern part of Europe, but a lot of the aerial fighting and combat that happened during World War II, part of that was under the command of Victor Strom. Well, Strom stays in after the war as well, and he ends up, if anyone's an Air Force veteran, you'll recognize this name. He becomes the commander of Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. So Strom is there as a commander, and this is the early 50s, and he unfortunately has some health problems that bring him to retire. But Strom spent 36 years in the military, retires in 1957, and unfortunately with his health problems, I guess he's kind of an A-type personality. He ultimately took his own life. He didn't want to live with health problems. But he's the one fellow who really had a very extended career and one of the aces in World War I from Kentucky. I did want to talk about one more pilot, and before I leave the aces, the Air Force Almanac tells us that there were 72 World War I aces, 72 American pilots who shot down at least 5 enemy planes. Okay, 4 of those were from Kentucky. Do a little percentage, we're about 5.5% of all the aces from World War I are from Kentucky. But if you look at the population of Kentucky relative to the U.S., we're a really small part of the whole United States, but we have a rather strong representation in some very capable pilots who flew during World War I. I've been staying with pilots who are in a group that ultimately becomes the United States Air Force. One pilot during this time who didn't happen to get into combat, who is from Kentucky and does deserve mention, is a fellow who is flying as a naval aviator. And I've heard this said, and no offense, Air Force pilots, they say, are like bus drivers. They stay on a schedule and they do it that way and they follow the time and the date and everything. Naval aviators are out there and they'll just take it to you, and if it's a little ad-libbing and a little improvisation, go for it. That's what naval aviators do. So there's a little rivalry between the service. I want to talk about one of these guys who flew for the Navy. His name's Richard Southley. And Richard is from Lincoln County, and that's kind of in the middle of the state, kind of southeast. If you ever heard of Stanford, Kentucky, that area, that's where Richard is from. And Richard has a good fortune of attending the U.S. Naval Academy. He's a graduate of the class of 1908, but he is like number 2 in his class of 308 ensigns who graduate that year. Really bright guy. And he goes and gets what is called surface warfare duty. He's on a boat. But by 1913, he's back at Annapolis, and they have something that's sort of like aviation summer camp. The Navy's going to get into the flying business, and Southley, you're a smart enough guy, we want you to be one of our pilots. And anyone who is, has a very low number as a naval aviator was really there at the beginning. Richard Southley is naval aviator number 14. So he was definitely there as the Navy was first getting into the aviation business. Now, looking at what he was doing back then, Southley was sort of like a test pilot during World War I, as Strom was during the 1930s, but Strom was doing basically things that are more Air Force. But at that time, the Navy does not really have aircraft carriers. During World War I, the Royal Navy was messing around with putting some flat decks and trying to launch planes from battleships with temporary launch decks. Well, the Navy here in the U.S. was not overlooking that, and Southley was doing some things with battleships where they would put up temporary launch platforms. And it's really dicey business because the planes are light, the runways are narrow, you have to have usually some way to aid you to get enough speed so that Bernoulli effect works and you get the plane out of the way of the aircraft, out of the way of the ship. And Southley is doing a lot of what you might call test pilot work for the Navy. And he's also finding out what a pilot can do in the way of endurance and how high planes can fly. Well, Southley is doing this, and he's making a lot of achievements. He's at Pensacola, Florida. Any naval pilots, it's still a very active naval Aviation Base. It's also home to the Naval Air Museum. But Southle's doing his flying in Florida, Pensacola, and one day he gets up in the sky and he flies for over 8 hours. He's not down on the ground for 8 hours. Remember what kind of planes we've been talking about? That was a real challenge. The next day he wants to see if he can supersede that and go beyond 8 hours. Something goes wrong with the aircraft and he crashes and dies in that unfortunate event. So very promising gentleman. He was only 31 years old when he went down. It was in 1916. Did not actually do any combat flying, but if we look at the history of naval aviation, Richard Southley from Kentucky really made a big contribution. He was recognized for his contribution. Southley Field in Florida was a naval base for a while for flying, and the USS Southley was not a battleship, but a surface ship for the Navy that had his name, so he was honored in that way. He's something that we as citizens of Kentucky can be proud of, and we recognize that. He was indoctrinated into the Kentucky Aviation Hall of Fame in 2005. Well, there's our aces. We had 4 of them. And when we look back at World War I and what a challenge it was to be a pilot, and the fatality rates and the mortality rates are truly frightening, for these 4 fellas from Kentucky to get through this and to achieve their 5 victories and to live through it, it was truly an achievement. Like I said, only 72 pilots did that compared to the 10,000 pilots from America that trained. Not all of them obviously got into combat. But when you think of the very small number and how well Kentucky is representative, we have a very obvious source of pride. Now, to wrap up, I just want to mention what's over there. I got some other things about some aircraft that were used in World War I. You'll see some other personalities mentioned. If you ever wondered why those guys wore a silk scarf, there was a very practical reason. That's described over there too. It's been my pleasure to speak to you. I hope you enjoyed this. This is something I think as citizens of Kentucky we can have pride in, and it's been my pleasure to share it with you. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you, Marty. Appreciate it. Question for you.
Yes.
Did anti-aircraft guns come along at about the same rate that they were developing the aircraft?
When you say aircraft guns, you mean
Anti-aircraft guns
anti-aircraft
coming from the
guns.
ground.
Yes.
Okay.
It didn't take too much for the European powers who had developed some big artillery pieces to find ways to modify them and also their projectiles so they would have, shrapnel and things like that or explode in a particular manner up in the sky. It was given a nickname. The British called the German anti-aircraft artillery Archie. So if you're flying, you say, look out for Archie when you're flying.
Okay.
So yes, some of it was developed, but one thing I didn't mention is that there was certainly, during World War I, an industrial revolution that was affecting how engines were built. Weapons and munitions and explosives and fuels, and a lot of basic things where industrial chemistry, organic chemistry, all those kinds of sciences that would have a very positive effect on those kinds of things. That was going on as well.
Okay.
You know how many aces there were in World War II and Korea and Vietnam? Just some idea.
Look it up.
101st.
Okay, that's strictly Air Force, but yeah, they do have the list of aces. And you might imagine World War II had a huge number of aces. But when we get to Vietnam, it's like a handful because of the type of warfare. But we do have, if you add it to that Vietnam story, there was a gentleman from Bowling Green who flew in the Vietnam War who does have one victory. And it's a gentleman who stayed in the military, made a career out of it. After his days in Vietnam, he ended up being the commander of the U.S. Thunderbirds demonstration team. But yeah, if you look through that, it's quite a list. And those are just the Air Force. So you got to recognize we had the Navy list, especially for World War II and Korea. We have an expanded list of aces. But if you want to know anything about the Air Force, the almanac there kind of gets you all the information. One last point, if you do head down toward Lexington, if you go to Keeneland and like to watch horse racing, The museum's right across the street at the airport. Just go back Airport Road. It's really nice. You don't have to go through airport security to visit us. And we're open every day but Monday, so there's my little pitch as well. Thank you all for listening. I've enjoyed this very much.
All right, let's move on to our business meeting then, because like I said, we do have a number of things to talk about, so let's try to get through these. Treasurer's report from Steve. Last month was very, very light on income. We only had $36 in income. We started out with a balance of $11,135.18. We had $36 in income. We spent $520. The bulk of that was for our essay contest winners. Okay, that was about half of it, which left us an ending balance at $10,650.34. Jan's not here with paid membership. That was, do you remember what that was the other night? 260 something or so is our paid membership at this point. Do you have minutes from last? Okay. Richard has our minutes from the last meeting.
We met at the Wilder City building. Approximately 40 people showed up. Ken Reese started the meeting and welcomed our visitors. Martha Pelfrey introduced the winners of our essay contest, and they read their essays. I hope I got their names right, but Kennedy Kramer read about her family's involvement in the local cattle industry. Harley Bailey read about the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire, but David Schultz could not attend. Ken then introduced Tom Seether, our speaker for tonight, who discussed his family's history all the way from Germany through Campbell County, including 4 brothers who fought in the Civil War, 3 on the Union and 1 for the Confederacy. Then we went to our normal business meeting with most of our usual reports. Steve reported an end of August balance of $11,135.18. We did not have reports on any new donations, veterans, or the newsletter. I read the minutes from August and reported on an upcoming History Day meeting. We also had reports on the office cleaning organization with some ideas for the future. Steve reported on his goal to establish an index and numbering system for our photograph collection. And we mentioned our hope to purchase a new microfilm reader in the future. Ken then mentioned our future meetings and closed the meeting. And our next meeting, of course, is here tonight at the Wilder City.
While you're up, Richard, we're going to do gifts and donations. I know you have a more extensive list this month.
Yeah, this month we had donor Nancy Orlando donated us a book called God's Hill. Apparently she's a Campbell County author, so it's a local book. Ann Painter donated us a portrait of A.J. Jolly, the individual. It's got a couple scratches on it, but still a pretty neat old picture. Kenneth Rocky gave us a DVD of an oral history interview with World War II veteran Charles Schweitzer. Chester Nelson, another veteran, donated his World War II uniform. And then we do have a few other things. I know a few old ledger books and then some photographs that I haven't gone through completely yet, but I'll report on it at the next meeting.
Steve, on our photos collection. I'm continuing to do the index and a reference chart for all of our photos. It's very, very slow going. Somebody dropped some negatives into my mailbox and I've scanned those. Some of them are duplicates of photographs that we already had in our collection, but some were brand new ones, so those are being added. There were about just under 100 that I added to it that I've scanned now. So that's where that stands. Pam's not here with veterans records, and I don't recall what she said the other night.
She didn't give us a count, but she said that she's working on correcting the index because we've got over 13,000 names and just working on getting that index updated.
There were some issues with the index where the Excel spreadsheet file or cells got misaligned, and so she's working to get those back aligned again. And I think she said she had finished those now, and they're realigned so that index should work a whole lot better now. Jan on the newsletter is looking for articles. Anybody has anything they want to contribute, the next newsletter will come out at the end of December?
Yeah.
Yeah, end of December. And that will have all membership renewal forms and everything in it. Somebody who is here. Marvin, do you have a report on cemeteries?
Yes, I do.
Excellent.
We have had a hot lead of another cemetery that's in the Clarydale area. And I've been trying to establish the fact that yes, there is, or no, there isn't. The people that own the property nationwide organization, nonprofit organization that's taking veterans, and most of those are either physically unable or financially unable to go to Washington, D.C. to see monuments and things like that. So this honor flight this time was honoring women in the military, and the women that were escorts also were former military. So there's 122 people, or 128, something like that, that took the trip to Washington, and Martha Pelfrey was allowed to hold the flag for the Mary Ingalls chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. And she's a member of the organization, so she was pretty honored to do that. And Pam also held another flag. But it's certainly an interesting thing to be able to do that, so I was kind of glad that we were able to get a handful of folks there to have a good time and welcome these folks back.
And I understand that is the first ever
Yes.
all-female
Yes.
honor flight.
Yeah.
Made national news and was quite
And there was probably about 1,000 people there welcoming them back. So if anybody gets a chance to ever go to one of those welcome back celebrations, it's usually about 10:30 in the evening. There's a couple of ways to get around the airport parking. You can park at Fast Park, which is out on the other side of the thing, for $4, whether you stay 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever, as opposed to being charged by the hour. And then they have a shuttle service that'll take you right and drop you off at the door. You do not have to go through security. It's kind of a good idea to get there before 9:30 because the security system changes a little bit, and if you're kind of halfway between, you may not get to be where you want to be. And secondly, they have the Happy Sons of Ireland, maybe the Smiling Sons. I've never seen any frowning Sons of Ireland, but they do a couple of practice rounds of their bagpiping and drumming, and so you get kind of a concert beforehand if you get there a little early, and then when they come in, they're leading them in. It's a great celebration, a great celebration.
Thank you much for putting that together. I know you had, 4 or 5 people went out?
Yes, yes.
I've heard reports subsequent to that it was just a really touching event.
And there'll be, I don't know if there'll be another all-women, but about 5 times each summer, there's an honor flight. Lexington does one too. Most of the time, that's guys from Pendleton County. I know a few of them, but I've never been able to come back to Bluegrass Airport. Marty did a good story here, but let me throw his commercial for him. They have flights periodically, and if any of you have ever wanted to fly in a UH-1D, that's a Huey, the helicopters that have been used forever since Vietnam and whatever. We did some treetop flying early this spring, my son and I, and I asked the guy if I could drop smoke, and he said, "Oh, you've been in one of these before, haven't you?" Yeah. So if you get a chance to go down there, it's not an expensive project, $65, $70. You can fly around for about 40 minutes or so, and the fact that you're flying over horse country, there's a lot of very manicured farms. It's not like flying over Campbell County. We have as much land. The only thing of it is it's kind of convoluted and whatever. So, and if you get a chance to go down to the Air Museum, I think 1 or 2 times a year they do that, where you can get on an airplane and do the thing.
All right. Some housekeeping things then. I don't know if anybody caught wind or not. Jan Mueller has resigned from the board. She'll still be a member of the Historical Society, but she's having some health issues right now and feels like she needs to kind of back off to get her health back. The talk at this moment is that probably a year from now she might be interested in coming back on the board, but she's got to take care of herself right now, so we'll miss her certainly. We will make arrangements for Secretary, Richard and Dan. Dan doesn't know, but he's getting pressured into taking that role on, at least temporarily, and then come November, next month with elections, we'll find somebody else to fill that slot so that we get all the minutes kept up to date and everything. One of Ken's big pet projects has been the sign in front of the courthouse. As most of you know, the sign was redone, and our portion of the sign is really pretty minuscule. It doesn't show up, it's hard to read from the road, and we were pretty agitated about it. Ken has worked diligently and finally got the approval that we can eliminate one line of that sign. We can redo the sign, our portion of it, and we're going to make the letters larger, we're going to make the letters bold. We've talked to the sign maker, Ken's talked to the sign maker. We can do that for very little cost, and I think it's going to help us with some visibility. There are people that come to the office now and say, you know, you guys need a sign out in the front here. There is a sign, but nobody sees it. They see the conservation district part of it, and they quit reading. That they think it's their sign. So hopefully this will differentiate and let people know that there are two entities in that building, at least for right now, and they'll see us, and maybe we'll get some more visitors. One of the big things that's been happening at the office, and how many of you go to the office? Okay. We got a lot of stuff down there. There's a whole lot of stuff in the research library, there's a whole lot of stuff in the museum, and you know, stuff goes here, and then stuff goes here, and then it goes here, and pretty soon you've got stuff piling up, and we're not sure what we have. So we've kind of made a concerted effort over the last couple of weeks to start a cleanup campaign. And if you go down there, the front office, Pam and Dan have done a phenomenal job of getting the front office cleaned up. It looks nice and neat now. It's very presentable when you walk in the front door. And it looks great. There's more to be done there. We've moved a bunch of filing cabinets that have all the family histories in them. Those have all been moved into the research library. All the filing cabinets now match. All the drawers work. Thank you, Marvin. And it should be much easier to get to those family files now. The gray negative collection. We had some issues. There's some new tenants coming into the courthouse. The gray collection that I'm sure you all remember, 500,000 negatives, was down in the basement, and they're down there tearing up carpet and tearing out tiles and doing drywall and this, that, and the other. There's dust going everywhere. We had to get them out of there. They actually moved them from where we had them, and so we had to get them into our space to protect them. That's been accomplished now. Jeff, the Martha Pelfrey Library sign is now up. Thank you ever so much. And the doorbell works.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weimer. We appreciate that. Nobody knew who did it. We all looked at each other. When did this happen? So, but Jeff took care of that. Thank you very much. Our next step is we've started a junk pile. And we have filing cabinets that had signs on them that said, don't pull this drawer out, it'll fall on you, okay? That doesn't work. We've started a junk pile now, old technology. And that's all going to be disposed of. We've made arrangements with somebody who is going to pay us probably a very meager amount, but we're going to haul the stuff over to them, and they're going to give us something for it. It'll free up some space, and we can kind of start anew with some of this stuff so that the important things that we have are more readily available for everybody. Next step will be to find some of those non-pertinent things that are on the shelves. We have a whole collection of books from Connecticut that came to us from somebody, and if we had a connection to Connecticut, they would be very important to us, but we don't. And so we're probably going to find a way to repurpose those, either to contact somebody in Connecticut that can make better use of them than we can. We'll do something with them. I mean, they're not just going to be thrown in a landfill somewhere. And there's a number of other things that never get used, have no purpose up there, and we want to clear the space for things that are more pertinent to our organization. Then the next step is to rework that museum, because right now there's a lot of stuff just piled on top of stuff. Nothing has been, some of the stuff has been signed fairly well, but some of the stuff, there's no signage on it. Nobody knows where it is. Nobody knows where it came from. Nobody knows anything about it. So we want to get all of that marked. So that's all coming. We've been discussing a new microfilm reader. Microfilm readers are very expensive. Got a couple of quotes in. We discussed it at the last board meeting. Not sure what we're going to do at this point. Jan Lester has written a grant for a potential $2,500 toward the cost of a microfilm reader. But by the time we're done buying a new microfilm reader, scanner, and computer, and monitor, and printer, and so on and so forth, we're probably talking somewhere in the $8,000 range. That's a lot of money. You heard what the treasurer's report is, that, you know, there's too many other things that we need to do as well. And yet a microfilm reader scanner is important. So if you know anybody that wants to give us a Christmas present, we're all ears, okay? We're probably going to wind up being about $5,000 or $6,000 short of being able to purchase one right now. But we'd like to have that available. We have a collection of microfilm and microfiche. The other advantage that I learned in researching this is that we can use this to, if somebody comes to us with an interest in that gray negative collection, we can actually scan those those negatives on these scanners today and print out from there, which means that instead of having to invest $50,000, $60,000 to scan them and save them, or we found one Walgreens that still will print film, or print from negatives. There's one Walgreens that will do it over in Latonia. We can now do it instantaneously, and we can make that collection available immediately to people instead of waiting until we decide what we're going to do with that. So there's a real plus to having the microfilm reader. Ken wanted me to mention that for anybody that was at the 25th anniversary celebration, you saw the donation that Applied Imagination gave us, the courthouse model. Absolutely gorgeous. It's on display at the office. And we want to recognize them for that donation. And so at our December Christmas affair, we're inviting them. We've had a plaque made for them, and they will be there so that we can recognize them for what they've done for us. A reminder that the Herbst Tour is coming up on Sunday the 18th. Okay, we will be, are you going to be there?
I'm going to be at St. Joe's.
Okay, we'll all be at St. Joe's.
But we need a few more bodies.
Okay. I know Jan's going to be there. I'll be there. Are you going to be there, Dan? Okay. Anybody else want to come up? We're at the church. Okay, and it's always a good time. Everybody wants to come and talk about their families and about the houses, and they go through all the photo albums, and it's really a lot of fun. So anybody else wants to come up and spend some time there, please do. Future meetings. Next month, is we're right back here at the Wilder City Building. It's election night, and we are going to have some positions available and open on the board, so it should be a very interesting night to see who joins us on the board, okay?
We gotta change, you'll be secretary.
See, you're getting that pressure. Don Holtzman is going to come talk to us that night on researching our German ancestors. I think most of us in this room probably have German heritage of some sort, so it ought to be an interesting talk that Don's going to give us. December, we're back here for our holiday social. Hills of Kentucky Dulcimers are going to be here again, and presentation of a number of plaques. January and February are still open. We don't know exactly what we're having yet. We're working on that. March, Ken has made arrangements for Dave Schroeder to come speak to us on St. Joseph Orphanage that was in Cold Spring. Okay, that should be a real interesting one. And right before we came in here, I was on the phone for our April meeting with Dee Martz Schroeder, who is Jake Martz's daughter from Martz's Playground. And she's agreed to come. She doesn't want to speak. She said she's not comfortable with that, but she has assembled, for a family reunion that they had a couple of months ago, she assembled a scrapbook, actually a multi-volume scrapbook, from the inception of the park. And I told her, I said, I'll tell you what, just having you here to answer questions and to help people reminisce would be huge. So if I can meet with you ahead of time and go through that scrapbook so I can get the story straight, I'll talk to everybody, but then you be here to answer questions and stuff. And she said that she would do that. So that's going to be our April meeting, and we'll be back here for that. And that's all I got. Anybody else have anything else?
My church, First Baptist Church of Fort Thomas, celebrated our 100th anniversary.
Wow.
In September. Last Sunday we had a service where we put things in for the cornerstone to be opened at 100 years. And I put the things from our history day, our day out at
The 25th anniversary?
The 25th anniversary. Both
Very nice.
The program as well as the other with all the minutes of the meeting and the court. And then from History Day, they gave us a button that was Kentucky history, so I put that in too.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
I guess we'll all be around when they open that.
I will be. Yeah.
I'm sure you'll be there.
I'll meet you there.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything?
I'd like to mention the Civil War Roundtable. It will be next Tuesday night at the Cold Spring Library. It's very seldom we get to announce that.
Okay.
It's going to be on the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky.
Yeah. Anybody be interested in that?
Very good. Thank you everyone very much for coming tonight. Appreciate it. Have a safe trip home.